coordination and information management, they go hand in hand, and they have to, because it can't be up to each individual cluster or each individual agency to find their own information. So information comes in from all sorts, and it's only really when the information comes together and how it's coordinated, with the cluster being the main vehicle for the compilation and then dissemination of that, that's really, really critical. And I think that's the only way that a lot of the smaller agencies that may have less linkages and less access to information, they can rely on other agencies, UN agencies, international NGOs, to help bring their various pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, there are two aspects. One is that if you don't know the data, if you don't have the information to make your decision or to coordinate based on the sharing of the information, then you don't have the basics, then you don't have the clay to work with. On the other hand, if you do have information, especially in a situation where there are many actors, there are many needs assessments or other evaluations going on the ground, you end up with having enormous amount of data. But it's usually raw data or data which you need to process, which you need to analyze. And that's something of a great challenge, because depending on how you analyze your data will then give you the picture you need to have in order to make decisions.
Information management is important for coordination because through this you're able to collect information, to analyze, to process it, and to disseminate the same information. Key decision makers can use this as a way to inform on what should take priority over the other. Other stakeholders are able to plan their work, and it can inform also the donors on where the gaps are, on what has been covered using the funds. And it's a really key thing in terms of humanitarian response.
Information sharing is critical to any disaster management system. But what seems we're always challenged by the most obvious. We know we're going to have to share information, and yet we're not good at it.
In a sense, if you say that what we do is we collect, we analyze, and we visualize or disseminate data, I think we spend too much energy on collecting and visualizing and not enough on analyzing. Right? And it's easy to feel like I've done something useful once I collected all this data. But if it actually doesn't do anything for you in terms of decision-making support, monitoring your operation, then what are you actually doing? Right? And so it's a more tangible part of information management. And that's probably why we focus so much on it.
There is often a perception that there's a lot of time spent on data collection and feeding different animals and so forth. And that tends to come up much more when you have both systems in the same place, when you have a cluster system plus UNHCR plus IOM, etc. And obviously our challenge is to overcome that sort of fragmentation. At the same time, you do have calls for more independent and more impartial needs assessments coming from certain donors. Now, that's coming from a good place, that they want decisions to be based on sound information, but it may contribute to more and more collection of data and not necessarily the use of it.
I think we spend a lot of energy gathering data around what our outputs are. And that has some use to it, but I wonder whether it could be more effective for us to, in addition to collecting the information on our outputs, is to spend more energy on what our outcomes as humanitarians are in the system. That probably requires some changes in the way that we focus on data collection. The understanding of what information management is intended to deliver for the shelter cluster is becoming more understood and predictable. We have had typical systems in place for quite a few years now. That aspect is, due to, I guess, the predictability of the systems that we've had in place and the willingness of the cluster partners to do it. I guess maybe they find value in it. So I guess that's the result of having established systems.
We've had challenges in both arenas with information management. It's something we've been focusing on in New York City. Just better ways of collecting information post-event and sharing that information. And that's very similar to what happens, in a humanitarian crisis. It's often very challenging and difficult to get information, from organizations that they feel like that, it may put their organization or their activities into question or at risk if they share, exactly what they're doing.
I think that the cluster system and other coordination mechanisms that exist out there have a lot to gain from a shared experience, and that they learn from each other, and that they can adapt similar approaches and principles. I mean, the need for agencies to have a common entry point for sharing their information, and that an understanding of what types of products that they might expect from sharing those products is important. And I mean, the cluster system isn't the only coordination game in town. And I think, if we think about just coordination in general and not just box it into the cluster approach is useful, and that we can share those experiences between the different established coordination mechanisms.